Fortunately, over the last 30 years, the Ethiopian wolf has been under tremendous pressure. It's suffered from hunting, habitat loss, and most recently from disease. And it's now meant that there's probably only 500 individuals left in the wild, so it is teetering on the edge. And of course, a few years ago, Ethiopian wolves were blamed for livestock predation by local people and were hunted because of it, but that has since been proven wrong, and the hunting of Ethiopian wolves has stopped. But the main problem that the Ethiopian wolf is facing is habitat loss. And that's all down to the fact that Ethiopia's human population has been expanding at a rapid rate. And now all those people now need more space to live and grow their food. And as they take up the land for farming, that's leaving less space for the Ethiopian wolves to live and raise their own pups. And now all the wolves are being squeezed into the highest mountain ranges of Ethiopia. But unfortunately, these wolves are not just being threatened by the loss of their habitat or hunting. In fact, because people in Ethiopia, like many people around the world, keep dogs, and unfortunately, pet dogs in Ethiopia have one of the highest rates of rabies in the world, a disease that affects all members of the canine family and is fatal. And the wolves easily catch rabies when they come into contact with pet or stray dogs. But there is hope for this species, because vaccinations are being given to the local dogs to prevent the spread of rabies to the Ethiopian wolves, and efforts are gradually being made to preserve the habitats they live in, so this population could increase from 500 in about 30 years or more, and conservationists are working with local people to find ways for them to adapt and live alongside Ethiopian wolves without there being any conflict. Of course, here is their range in Ethiopia. Now, the next wolves I'm going to show you are probably the most northerly members of the dog family. They are Arctic wolves. Now, Arctic wolves are, as their name suggests, found in the Arctic. They're a lot different to their grey wolf cousins. They're a lot smaller, with smaller ears and tails to prevent less heat loss, and they have thick white fur. And of course, there's actually an island in the Canadian Arctic called Elsmere Island, where the wolves there have no fear of human beings. And that's mainly down to the fact that the wolves of Elsmere Island, many of them have never seen a human being before, and many of them have never been hunted by humans. So they have no fear of man at all. And of course, life in the Arctic for these wolves is very, very hard. I mean, packs often consist of only 10 or 15 animals. Most wolves don't live beyond about 7 years, and about 75% of pups die before their first year. But it's not just the mortality rate that makes them so hardy. It's also the fact that they are probably the most opportunistic of all wolves. Because here there's a couple of wolves chasing an Arctic hare, which in itself is a very difficult animal to catch, because it can run almost as fast as a racehorse, and it could outpace a wolf on open ground. But they also hunt caribou, as you can see here, because in the Arctic, caribou make the longest land migration of any animal, and of course the wolves tend to prey on the the newborn calves or elderly members of the caribou herds. But probably the most dangerous prey that Arctic wolves regularly hunt is this, musk oxen. Now, musk oxen are in the cow family, so that contains animals like the water buffalo, the Cape buffalo, and the bison, and the musk oxen themselves. And musk oxen were actually around during the Ice Ages, so they didn't just evolve around wolves, they also evolved around mammoths, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and other large predators that are now extinct. And of course, they have very, very short tempers and a head that's like a sledgehammer. And in one flat-out charge, they could snap a wolf's spine, or they could use their horns here to just gouge and gore at them. So wolves are the Arctic wolves on Elsmere Island, because the musk oxen there are probably the most dangerous prey that the wolves there take down. And of course, it's mainly down to the fact that when musk oxen are threatened by wolves, what they do, well, quite often is they gather up as a herd with the calves on the inside and present a wall of horns to any attacker. And of course, the calves or lone elderly bulls are easily brought down by wolves. And of course, the Arctic wolf is not an endangered animal at all. There are probably hundreds or thousands of them in the Arctic Circle, but on Elsmere Island there's probably only about 500 wolves. And of course, as I mentioned before, the wolves on Elsmere have no fear of humans, and it's actually believed that those wolves there, with their inquisitive nature towards people, that could have led wolves to become man's best friend in the form of dogs. Of course, here is the range of the Arctic wolf. And of course, right here is Elsmere Island, where the wolves have no fear of man. And the next animal, the next wolf I'm going to show you is probably the strangest member of the dog family. It is the maned wolf. Now, the maned wolf is found in South America, and it is one of the most peculiar looking animals on the planet. I mean, it's almost as if someone's just taken a red fox and stretched it. Of course, those long legs allow it to stand up above the tall grass on the savannas where it lives, and its enormous ears can pick up the small rustlings of something like a vole or a rat or anything in the long grass. And of course, then they can pounce on their prey quite easily. But another strange thing about the maned wolf is that a lot of its diet is mostly made up of fruit. In fact, about 50 to 60% of a maned wolf's diet is made up of fruit that you'd find in forests. And of course, they're also nocturnal, which means they're active at night. In fact, around dusk and midnight are when they're most active, and they go out to look for food, which can be fruit from trees, unattended eggs of birds or reptiles or small mammals. In fact, they will eat just about anything. But also, because wolves, as I've mentioned before, are pack animals, but not the maned wolf. They live alone and will defend a territory of probably up to 150 square miles. And how they got their name, the maned wolf, is that dark area of fur around the nape of the neck and the shoulders. And that can quite often be used as a way to make itself look bigger and more aggressive. And that can be enough to drive off a predator like a puma, a jaguar, or even a rival maned wolf. Of course, maned wolves are endangered, and so they are very hard to find. But there is one place in Brazil where you can see them, and it's probably the best place in the world to see them. It is the monastery of Caraça, because around about 20 odd years ago, the monks there realised that something, a large predator, was going through their garbage, and they worked out that it was the maned wolves. And since then, they had been deliberately leaving food out for them. So these two pictures here are from the monastery of Caraça, and what they do is they leave a big plate of meat out for them, and the wolves will quite often pick up the scent of that from a mile away, and they'll come in for a free feed. And of course, as I mentioned, they are one of the strangest members of the dog family, but they are also one of the most beautiful of all. Here is their range in South America. Now, the next and final member of the wolves I've chosen that I'm going to show you is probably the least known member of the wolves, but also probably the rarest. It is the red wolves. Red wolves were once native to the southern states of North America, but in the 1980s they were hunted to extinction. However, they have been reintroduced into the state of North Carolina and also the neighbouring states, and they're slowly making a comeback in the southern states of North America. And of course, they do live in packs like grey wolves, but they also feed on carrion, dead meat, but their main diet mainly consists of rabbits, rodents, deer, and pretty much anything they can catch. Well, as you can see, they do look a little bit like a grey wolf, but they have different coloured fur, and they have sort of like an orangey red colour fur. Of course, if it weren't for conservationists in the southeastern states of the USA, this animal would almost certainly be extinct. And of course, while they are slowly making a comeback in the southern states of North America, they are still one of the hardest animals to find because they're endangered and they're very shy, very elusive, avoid people, and of course there's probably only about 30 or 40 or possibly even 50 in the wild, and that's mainly in the conservation area they've been reintroduced. And of course the thing is, when they were reintroducing wolves, not just red wolves but also grey wolves to the USA, they had to make sure that they were not used to humans, because that would mean that they would be coming into contact with humans, picking up food from them, possibly going for livestock, and that would just start a cycle of them being killed all over again. And fortunately, the red wolf is, as I said, making a comeback like the grey wolf, but it could be a long time before red wolves make a full recovery in the wild. And according to all my research, the best place to see red wolves right now is in North Carolina, which is mainly down to that's where they were reintroduced first. But they are very, very beautiful animals, and hopefully, fingers crossed, they will make a full recovery. Because here is the range they're in. Of course, that was their historic range, but of course, here is where they were reintroduced, so that's their source population.